The city of Greenwood, where the story begins, is a small town in the southern United States, lying quietly under a persistent drizzle. The old brick-paved streets, the dim yellow glow of streetlights reflecting on puddles, create an atmosphere both tranquil and stifling. John Carter, a white police officer in his early 40s, sat in his patrol car, his gaze drifting idly outside. He was a man with chiseled features, dark brown hair, and piercing eyes. For John, the job was a heavy obligation, and tonight was no exception. A voice crackled over the radio. "Carter, we've got a call about a dispute on Elm Street. A black woman causing trouble. Go check it out." John picked up the radio, replying curtly, and then started the engine. Under his breath, he muttered, "Here we go again with their drama." The unspoken prejudice was clear in his eyes. To John, black people often brought trouble, a belief ingrained in him through stories passed down in his family since childhood. When he arrived at the scene, John saw a black woman standing in the middle of the deserted street, clutching a bag of belongings, her clothes soaked through by the rain. She was arguing with a white man across the road. "What's going on here?" John called out coldly, approaching the scene. The woman turned to look at him, her sharp, dark brown eyes shining in the dim light. It was Ava Brooks, a woman in her early 30s, tall and slender but radiating strength. She met John's gaze without a trace of fear. "You should ask this man. He insulted me first," Ava responded, her voice clear and firm. John frowned, uninterested in hearing more. He stepped closer, raising a hand to signal her to be quiet. "I don't care who started it. You're causing a disturbance here. You'd better leave before I have to take action." "Causing a disturbance?" Ava scoffed. "I'm just defending myself." The determination in her eyes unsettled John. His temper flared, and he grabbed the bag from her hands, shoving her aside. Ava stumbled but didn't fall. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted. In a moment of anger, John shoved harder, sending Ava sprawling onto the wet pavement. A sharp pain shot through her arm. Insults poured from John's mouth, the harsh words freezing the air around them. Ava slowly got to her feet, her eyes blazing with fury but her demeanor steady. "You'll pay for this," she said, her voice unwavering. John dismissed her words. To him, this was just another night on the job. But he had no idea that this act would be the spark that ignited a storm. One that would change not only his life but also the world around him. The next morning, John walked into the police station with a heavy heart but without any real concern. He hadn't given much thought to the previous night's incident, assuming it would be brushed aside like so many other minor events. However, the moment he stepped through the doors, he felt the strange stares of his colleagues. Whispered conversations and scrutinizing glances filled the air, making him uneasy. "You'd better head to the chief's office," a colleague murmured, their tone heavy with implication. John made his way down the long hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he opened the door to the office, he saw William Brooks, the police chief, seated behind his desk. William was a tall black man with a stern face and piercing eyes. But today, those eyes were filled with disappointment. "Ava Brooks is my wife," William said, without any preamble. John froze. For the first time, a pang of regret crept into his chest. "What were you thinking? Acting like that?" William continued, his voice low but commanding. "Did you think you could insult and assault someone just because of the color of their skin and not be held accountable?" John stammered. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to." William cut him off. "I don't care about your excuses. I've spoken with Ava. She wants you to face the consequences of your actions." John was suspended from duty immediately. The announcement hit him like a punch to the mind. He returned home, his head spinning, his thoughts a void. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Local newspapers ran the story with bold headlines. "Greenwood officer accused of racially motivated assault." Television channels seized the opportunity to cover the event extensively. Protests soon began outside City Hall and the police station. Crowds carried signs and chanted slogans demanding justice. In a closed-door meeting at City Hall, William Brooks faced tough questions from council members. Some supported him, while others criticized him, claiming he was damaging the reputation of the police force. "This is not just about John Carter," William said firmly. "This is about a system that has allowed such behavior to persist for far too long. I will not let this be swept under the rug." His words brought the room to a stunned silence. But they also signaled the start of a long battle, not just to defend Ava's dignity, but to challenge and change an unjust system. Meanwhile, John's life had completely unraveled. When he returned home, he found Sarah, his wife, sitting on the couch with a cold, emotionless expression. "What were you thinking? Doing something like that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Do you realize you've destroyed this family? Our daughter is too scared to go to school because she's being ridiculed." John hung his head, unable to respond. He realized that his actions hadn't just hurt Ava but had also brought immense suffering to his own family. That night, John lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind was in turmoil, but one question kept echoing in his thoughts. Where did I go wrong? And is there any way to make it right? The days ahead would not be easy, and he knew this was only the beginning. Greenwood was no longer the peaceful town it once was. The John Carter incident had extended far beyond the police department, becoming a national media sensation. Journalists from major cities flocked to the small town, turning it into the epicenter of a heated debate about racial discrimination in law enforcement. John Carter, who once prided himself on being a model officer, was now the target of widespread outrage. Social media platforms were flooded with his images, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForAva and #ReformThePolice. One morning, John stepped outside his house to find banners hung along the fence. "Racism has no place here. Carter, resign." Protesters had even gathered outside his home, surrounding his family with glares of contempt. Sarah, his wife, was buckling under the pressure. "John, do you know that every time I go shopping, people whisper and point at me? Our daughter cries every night because her classmates tease her," she said, tears streaming down her face. John didn't know how to respond. He could only silently stare out the window, where protesters waved signs, their eyes filled with disdain. He began to realize that this judgment wasn't just a fleeting reaction but the consequence of years of prejudice and wrong actions. John spent days isolating himself in his small home office. On the desk, police papers, files, and old photographs of him in uniform were scattered in disarray. The medals he once took pride in no longer shone brightly in his eyes. In his solitude, John began to recall childhood stories his father used to tell about those who aren't like us. Those stories had deeply imprinted on his mind, forming prejudices he had never questioned. One night, he picked up a book Sarah had left on the desk. It was a memoir by a civil rights activist. In the book, the author recounted the suffering and losses his family endured due to discrimination. The words cut into John's heart like a knife, making him wonder for the first time, if I were born black, could I endure what they've been through? For the first time in his life, John felt profound remorse. He wasn't just regretful for his actions toward Ava, but also for having lived so many years without ever questioning the prejudices within him. A week later, John received a call from the police station. None other than William Brooks was waiting for him in the office. As John stepped inside, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. William sat there, his sharp eyes fixed on John. But the anger from before had softened. "Carter, I didn't call you here to punish you further," William began. "Ava told me she wants to see change. Not just in you, but in the entire system." John sat silently, trying to grasp the weight of those words. "I've arranged for you to participate in a rehabilitation program specifically designed for officers who've violated ethical standards." William continued firmly. "This isn't a punishment. It's an opportunity." John was taken aback. "You're not firing me?" After everything I've done. William looked him straight in the eye. I believe everyone deserves a second chance. But this chance depends entirely on what you choose to do from here on out. This isn't about saving you. It's about protecting the future of this community. John left the office with mixed emotions. He knew this was an opportunity to make amends. But it was also a journey he had never envisioned undertaking. The rehabilitation program William had arranged was far from dry theoretical lectures. It was a hands-on experience. On the first day, John was taken to a community center in one of Greenwood's poorest neighborhoods. There, he met Mrs. Martha, an elderly black woman who managed the center. She looked at John with stern but not hostile eyes. "You're here to learn, not to judge," she said, her voice low but powerful. John was tasked with helping local children prepare for a talent show. At first, he felt out of place among the black children. But their curiosity soon broke the barriers between them. A young boy named Jamal, about 10 years old, asked him, "Are you a cop? Do you hate us?" The question froze John in his tracks. He didn't know how to respond. But the innocence in Jamal's eyes struck a chord within him. "No, I don't hate you," he replied, his voice softer than it had been in years. Gradually, John began to see the real people behind the stereotypes he had carried for so long. The children were full of joy and curiosity. The adults worked tirelessly to support their families. And their stories were ones of resilience in the face of injustice. One day, Mrs. Martha took him to a rundown neighborhood where her family once lived. "You see this?" she said, gesturing toward the crumbling homes. "We don't need pity. We need fairness." Her words echoed in John's mind, making him realize that change begins not just with actions but with the way he viewed the world. John knew the journey ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt he was on the right path. After weeks in the rehabilitation program, John Carter began to feel a shift in his perspective. However, a major challenge awaited him. One day, Mrs. Martha announced that Ava Brooks would be coming to the community center to participate in a discussion on building bridges between the police and the black community. John felt his chest tighten at the news. He wasn't ready to face Ava. The shame still weighed heavily on him. But Mrs. Martha, with her stern gaze, simply said, "You can't run forever, Carter. Sometimes, facing the pain is the only way to heal." The discussion took place in the community center's large hall. Ava Brooks arrived dressed in elegant yet powerful attire, exuding confidence. She walked in with calm composure, but when her eyes met John's, the tension in the room became palpable. During her speech, Ava recounted her experience on that fateful night. Her voice didn't waver, but every word cut deep into John's heart. She spoke not only about the physical pain but also the profound insult she and many others endured simply because of their skin color. When it was John's turn to speak, he stood, trying to steady himself. "I was wrong," he began quietly. "Not just for my actions that night, but for living my entire life with prejudices I never stopped to question." Ava's expression didn't change, but she listened in silence. At the end of the event, as people began to leave, John approached her. "Ava," he said, his voice trembling, "I don't expect you to forgive me right now, but I want you to know that I'm trying to change. For you, for everyone I've hurt." Ava looked at him for a moment. "Carter," she replied, her voice neither cold nor warm. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a moment. If you truly want to change, prove it with your actions, not your words." After meeting with Ava, John spent many sleepless nights reflecting on her words. He realized that his efforts at the community center were not enough to atone for his actions. Determined to do more, he began seeking ways to better understand the community he had once distanced himself from. John started reading books and watching documentaries about Black history, from the harrowing years of slavery to the civil rights movement. The images and stories moved him deeply. He came to understand that what he had once considered normal was, in fact, the result of a deeply entrenched system of injustice that had persisted for centuries. One day, John met Elijah, a retired black police officer who had endured years of discrimination within the force. Elijah, a man in his 60s with a deep, resonant voice and a face marked by experience, didn't mince words. "You're not the first to make mistakes, Carter," Elijah said bluntly. "But the real question isn't about the mistakes. It's about what you're going to do to make them right." Elijah's words became a guiding principle for John. He resolved not only to change his own mindset but also to make a meaningful impact on the community he had wronged. As John gradually changed, not everyone supported his journey. At the police station, his former colleagues began to distance themselves from him. Some even openly criticized him, accusing him of betraying them by siding with the black community. "I thought you were one of us, Carter," a colleague sneered. "And now you're apologizing to them? Don't you see we're the ones under pressure here?" John didn't respond. He understood that their criticism stemmed from a fear of change. But this didn't discourage him. On the contrary, it only strengthened his resolve. John's family life wasn't any easier. Sarah, his wife, began to feel worn down by the social pressure. She questioned whether John's transformation was genuine or just an attempt to appease public opinion. "Are you doing this for yourself or for us?" she asked. John didn't know how to answer. He realized that his journey was not just about making amends but also about rediscovering himself. Yet, he also knew that to salvage his family, he would have to do more. One day, William Brooks invited John to his office. John felt uneasy, unsure of what he would be facing. As he entered, William sat behind his desk, holding a folder in his hands. "I have an assignment for you, Carter," William said. "I want you to visit the Turner family. They're one of the victims of police harassment. Listen to their story." John felt conflicted. He wasn't sure he was ready to face people who had been hurt by the police. But the resolute look in William's eyes left him no room to refuse. When John arrived at the Turner household, he met a small family, an older couple and their daughter. They greeted him with hesitation. But after William called to assure them that John was there to learn, not to justify, they began to open up. Mr. Turner, the father, recounted an incident where he was pulled over by the police for driving in an area they deemed unsuitable for a black man. He was dragged out of his car, searched, and humiliated in front of his daughter, only for the officers to later dismiss it as a mistake. John listened silently, feeling the pain and humiliation the Turner family had endured. He realized that what happened to Ava wasn't an isolated incident but part of a much larger problem. As he left, John couldn't stop thinking about the Turner story. He knew that to truly change, he had to confront not only his own mistakes but also fight to reform the system that had caused such suffering. John Carter, once blinded by prejudice, now began to see the path he needed to take clearly. But would he have the strength and perseverance to continue facing the challenges ahead? The chapters to come would bring him closer to redemption and the hope for a fairer future. After meeting the Turner family, John Carter began to realize that change wasn't just about actions but also about listening and understanding. He returned to the community center and asked Mrs. Martha to assign him more challenging tasks. He wanted to prove that he wasn't simply working to improve his image, but was genuinely striving for change. One day, John received news that Ava Brooks would be hosting a talk at the center. The event focused on fostering dialogue between the police and the black community. John knew this would be another chance to face Ava, but this time, he hoped to do something meaningful to make amends. The talk drew a large crowd, including community leaders, families affected by police violence, and officers undergoing rehabilitation like John. Ava stepped onto the stage with a commanding and confident presence. She began to recount her story, not just the events of that fateful night, but also the lifelong struggles she and her family had faced. When the discussion portion began, John decided to stand up. He walked to the microphone, his hands slightly trembling, but his eyes were steady. "Ava," he began, "I want to tell you that I was wrong. Not just for what I did to you but for the years I lived in blindness, allowing prejudice to dictate my actions. I don't expect your forgiveness now, but I want you to know that I am trying to change. Ava stared at him for a few moments, saying nothing. The room fell silent. Finally, she spoke. Carter, I hear the change in your words, but I won't judge your transformation by what you say. Keep acting not for me, but for this entire community. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but for John, it was a glimmer of hope. He knew his journey was far from over, but he had taken another step forward. Not long after the talk, John was assigned to a task he hadn't anticipated, patrolling a poor neighborhood where the majority of residents were black. It was an area John had avoided during his previous shifts, partly out of fear and partly because of deep-seated prejudices. As he walked through the neighborhood, John could feel the eyes of the residents on him. Some whispered, some turned away, and others looked at him with clear hostility. He knew he wasn't welcome, and he couldn't blame them for it. During one patrol, John encountered a dangerous situation. An argument between two groups of young men had escalated into a physical altercation. As John intervened, some onlookers began shouting, accusing him of abusing his authority. Fear gripped him, but he forced himself to remain calm and spoke to both sides in a measured, conciliatory tone. As tensions eased and the situation de-escalated, a young man named Jamal stepped forward and said, "You did good. Not everyone would have the guts to talk it out like that here." Jamal was one of the boys John had met at the community center. His presence not only helped John mediate but also showed that trust, however small, could be built. The experiences in the neighborhood made John realize that real change couldn't happen alone. He began organizing meetings at the community center, inviting both police officers and local residents to participate. At one such meeting, Elijah, the retired black police officer, spoke, "Change doesn't come from one side. It requires both sides to listen, understand, and take action. John Carter, you've started your journey, and I hope you don't stop." John also shared his own story, admitting his mistakes and discussing the shift in his mindset. His heartfelt words moved many in the audience. A special event was organized, Greenwood Unity Day. This was John's initiative, supported by Ava and William Brooks. The event featured community activities, open discussions, and artistic performances by local residents. On that day, John wasn't just a participant but an active organizer. He joined in the activities, spoke with people, and began to sense a gradual shift in how others viewed him. Just as things seemed to be progressing, an article written by one of John's former colleagues was published in a local newspaper, openly criticizing him. The article described John as a traitor who had turned his back on the police force and was trying to pander to the black community. The article sparked a wave of controversy. Some people, particularly conservative police officers, expressed outrage and demanded that John be removed from the rehabilitation program. John was deeply hurt. He began to question whether his efforts were truly making a difference. He felt isolated and lost. However, Ava Brooks, who had once stood against him, publicly defended him for the first time during a press conference. She said, "Change is never easy, and those who have the courage to confront their mistakes and strive to change deserve our support, not our criticism. John Carter has done more than we ever expected, and I believe he is on the right path." Ava's words served as a powerful source of encouragement for John. He realized that, despite the challenges ahead, he couldn't give up. He wasn't just fighting to make amends, but also to build a better future for everyone. The morning after the press conference, John sat on the steps of the community center, his eyes fixed on the gray clouds drifting across the sky. Ava's words from the press conference still echoed in his mind. She hadn't needed to defend him, but she had. Why? The question stirred something within him, a deep need to see her. Not just to thank her, but to offer a more heartfelt apology. That afternoon, Ava arrived at the center to visit Mrs. Martha. When John saw her, he hesitated for a moment but then decided to approach her. "Ava, may I talk to you for a moment?" John asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Ava nodded, her gaze no longer carrying the anger of their first meeting, though she still maintained a measured distance. The two walked to the backyard, where the atmosphere was quieter. "I want to thank you," John began, "for what you said yesterday. I don't deserve to be defended like that, but you did it, and it means a lot to me." Ava studied him for a moment before responding. "Carter, I didn't do it for you. I did it for people like me, those who've been hurt but still hope that change is possible. If you truly want to change, I want to see your actions prove it." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He took a deep breath and said, "I know words can't undo what I've done, but I promise, I won't stop trying to be a better person." Ava didn't reply immediately. She turned to watch the children playing ball in the nearby yard. After a moment, she looked back at him, her expression softer. "I believe people can change, but forgiveness takes time. Carter, keep proving it through your actions, not your words." The conversation ended, but for John, it marked a turning point. He felt as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Even just a little. John decided to embark on a major project to continue building bridges between the police and the community. With the support of William Brooks, he began organizing a large event called Greenwood Unity Day. It wasn't just a cultural festival but also an opportunity for police officers and residents to come together, listen, and better understand one another. Plans moved forward quickly. John wasn't just overseeing the event. He was actively involved. He met with community groups, persuaded local businesses to sponsor the event, and even helped the kids from the community center set up the stage. On the day of the event, hundreds of people gathered at Greenwood's Central Park. The atmosphere was vibrant, with food stalls, live music performances, and an open discussion area where people could share their stories. During a segment of the program, Ava joined John on stage. Together, they shared their journey, a story of mistakes, remorse, and the hope for change. When we open our hearts to listen to one another, we don't just build understanding, we build a stronger community, Ava said. John followed, adding, "I've learned that change starts within ourselves, and I hope that everyone here today can begin that journey together." Applause erupted across the park. In that moment, John felt he had achieved something truly meaningful. After the event, the relationship between the police and the Greenwood community began to improve significantly. John became a symbol of change, not just in the town but beyond its borders. He was invited to participate in workshops and television programs to share his journey. However, challenges remained. Some conservative police officers continued to publicly criticize him. But this time, John didn't feel alone. He had the support of William, Ava, and the Greenwood community. During a police department meeting, John stood before his colleagues and said, "I made mistakes, and I've paid the price. But from those mistakes, I've learned that as police officers, we have a responsibility not just to protect but to build trust. I hope you'll join me on this journey." Some officers remained cold, but in a few eyes, he saw a shift. Elijah, John's mentor and friend, stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done well, Carter. Don't stop now." A year after the Greenwood Unity Day event, John Carter was invited to speak at a major conference in the capital, where he shared his journey in front of thousands of attendees. As he stepped onto the stage, he felt a mix of pride and humility. He knew he wasn't just representing himself but also those who had believed in and supported him along the way. "When I began this journey, I thought only about atoning for my own mistakes," John said. "But I realized that change isn't just personal. It's about connection, community, and the hope for a better future." At the end of his speech, Ava Brooks joined him on stage, and together they clasped hands. The moment, witnessed by thousands, became a powerful symbol of reconciliation and unity. Upon returning to Greenwood, John made the decision to leave his job as a police officer. He realized he could do more for the community as a social activist. He began working full-time at the community center, dedicating himself to creating projects that fostered connection and supported the people of Greenwood. John's story was no longer just about redemption. It was a testament to the power of transformation, the courage to face one's mistakes, and the belief in the possibility of reconciliation. Under the Greenwood sky, as the light of sunset bathed the streets, John Carter stood watching the children playing in the park. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He knew his journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt he had found the light at the end of the tunnel.